welcome. Former Colonel, or you are a Colonel, Douglas Mcgregor is with me one more time. And we did our last conversation on the 19th of September, and that has gotten 60,000 plus views on my Swedish channel, which is a world record, and on a Turkish channel, over 500,000.
Huh, interesting.
Which is interesting because I'm banned in the Middle East from my live. I send live every Sunday with a panel, and we discuss in Swedish language things, and we never get over 10,000 views. So that is sensational.
Well, congratulations. I'm glad it's worked well for you.
It did. I don't make any money on it, and that's not the purpose. But I have a few questions. I mean, we have, you're probably aware of Greta Thunberg and the whole situation. And the ceasefire agreement in Egypt, will it last? What's going to happen?
Well, I think we already know the answer to that question. Whether or not this actually turns out to be a pause is now the real question. We've had 7 Palestinians killed since this supposed agreement was reached. I'm not sure of the circumstances, but they were killed by the Israelis. You have some gangs operating in Gaza who apparently are on the payroll of the Israelis, who are there to foment conflict with Hamas. You have the leaders of the Palestinians in Gaza and Hamas saying that they have not agreed to disarm. They know that if they disarm, they'll simply be rounded up and killed. And then you have members of the Israeli cabinet that have utterly dismissed this agreement as irrelevant. They're busy trying to develop new settlements that will go into Gaza that will be entirely Jewish. I must say that the whole thing seems to have been an illusion from the very outset. So I don't expect anything really to come of this except more suffering. And as you know, that instead of 600 trucks delivering aid, that was cut back to 300. So it appears that the Israelis have not given up on their attempts to starve or inflict more misery on the population than they already have. So I think we have to be realistic. President Trump is very big on what I call optics, on appearances. He loves media events. He loves to be at the center of the event where he can effectively dominate the stage. He was able to do that in Israel in the Knesset. And I think that was an arrangement made between the Israelis under Mr. Netanyahu and him. I think one of the reasons he was brought over to Israel was to ask everyone to, quote unquote, pardon Mr. Netanyahu because he's really such a great person. And at the same time, he likes to be on stage in the United States. He spoke to this room full of 800 general officers in front of a large American flag, reminiscent of the opening of the movie Patton, where George C. Scott stands in front of the flag and gives a speech. I think Donald Trump, was there for the same purpose. And he was actually surprised when he came into the room because he thought everyone would stand up and cheer and clap for him. He doesn't understand the military or the professional military. If the commander-in-chief enters the room, you don't cheer and clap and applaud. You stand at attention and wait to be told that it's all right for you to sit down. But apparently he thought, well, I've never talked to an audience that didn't cheer me. It's one of the comments that he made.
Yeah.
So I think Donald Trump is more about appearances than he is about reality. And if the appearance was a success, then
didn't he get like a standing ovation in the Knesset when he said, "Pardon this guy," and pointing at Mr. Netanyahu?
Well, he did from some people, but there were obviously people in the audience shaking their heads and declining to join the throng of clapping Israeli delegates. Look, I don't see any evidence that we are on a road to peace in the Middle East, peace in Ukraine, and for that matter, we're apparently preparing to intervene or invade Venezuela.
Yeah.
So, if anything, we have a third war developing in the Southern Caribbean. It's very strange because all of these things are directly opposed to everything he said when he was running for election. He made the argument that he was going to end the war in Ukraine. I made the ridiculous assertion that could be done in 24 hours, which was nonsense. But nevertheless, he stood on the side of ending the war. I think he's now made a transformation into Joe Biden. We're now listening to another version of Biden. So one has to conclude that, the people surrounding President Trump have worked very hard to keep him moving in the directions they want him to go, both in the Middle East and Eastern Europe, and potentially now in the Southern Caribbean. It doesn't make any sense unless you understand that President Trump thinks that we are all powerful, that no one can stand against us. I think he's been convinced that the Russians are weak when they're not, that Russia can be bullied when it can't, and that with enough American military power, he can overwhelm the Middle East and ultimately defeat Iran. All the time, he's sort of following Israel's lead. Now he's convinced himself that he can move into Venezuela. And I don't think this has much to do with drugs or human trafficking, because the major hub for that is Colombia, not Venezuela. And we've got that problem already in Mexico in great numbers. So you don't need to travel all the way to Venezuela if you want to combat drug cartels. I think this, again, has a lot to do with capturing the oil and gas supplies in Venezuela, which I guess he thinks he can take. I mean, I suppose that would warm the hearts of former Vikings in Sweden, since that is kind of a Viking mentality, but it doesn't make any sense for us. And
No,
we don't
we steal. That was, Well, the Venezuela thing, for me, it's obvious. And also, I'm ashamed to be a Scandinavian when they give the Peace Prize, the Nobel Peace Prize, to a warmongering woman named Maria, Corina Machado. She's nothing but a Mossad, a Mossad agent, really, and a warmonger. But it hasn't stopped there. It was Al Gore got it. Barack Obama got it. So the testament from Alfred Nobel, when he died in Paris, he wrote that you have to have been an advocate for peace to get this prize.
Well, this woman's first public statement that attracted notoriety and attention in the United States was her promise to immediately move the Venezuelan embassy in Israel to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
So that leads one to believe that great effort and power and influence, underpinned, I suspect, by a lot of money, was brought to bear on the Norwegians who make this decision. As I understand, it's a committee of Norwegians. The last time I looked at, they were mostly women. So apparently they made the decision. So I guess you could, as a Swede, distance yourself from this, since the people making the decision weren't Swedish. But the whole thing is bizarre. It doesn't make any sense. I think it's reduced the prize to irrelevance.
Yeah, it has. And also, the committee, consisting of 6 people, 5 of them are politicians, Norwegian politicians, and 2 of them are high-ranking members of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab's project. So they're all globalists.
Yes.
So that's scary. Another thing, I'd like to say a thing. I'm getting suppressed on my YouTube channel very hard in Sweden, but things like these interviews that I can actually do with you and other heavy, like Glenn Deason and I speak and other prominent people. So they can't cancel us, but they try everything to do it. The normal, I say, I would like to. Tom Hanks is a good actor, but a dumb socialist. When he did the character of Forrest Gump, he says, "Stupid is what stupid does." Mm-hmm. And then I always think about Mark Rutte or Ursula von der Leyen.
Well, the thing to bear in mind about Mr. Hanks is that he works out of Hollywood.
Yeah.
We have to keep in mind who owns and operates Hollywood. So I think he probably should have said, rich are those who do the bidding of their masters in Hollywood, because that's really what he's saying.
Yeah.
We've got a huge problem. We have a very well-financed international conglomerate of people we currently call globalists who probably... let's see, 100 years ago would have been dismissed out of hand as Bolsheviks or anarchists. And they're running the show. And their show demands the destruction of Russia because it's a national state that has a national identity, history, culture, religion. And this state poses a threat to their plans because it's not prepared to jump into the abyss that most Europeans have eagerly jumped into. Mm. So I think that's the real basis for the conflict. I mean, I know everybody says this happened because of NATO expansion. Well, of course, 1990s and in the first part of this century, because of the globalists in charge of it. Mm. So there was a desire to take over Russia, remove its government, balkanize the place into multiple states, and then strip it of its resources and make it effectively a slave of the West. Well, that's failed. Right now, there's a desire to destroy Iran because Iran not only has oil and gas, but Iran is a critical player in the One Belt, One Road. And if you want to deny China prosperity, you have to put a chokehold on the oil and gas resources in the Persian Gulf and the Middle East. The best way to do that is to destroy Iran. And so the same effort to execute regime change and balkanize Russia has been applied to exercise regime change and ultimately balkanize Iran. The problem is, thus far, it's failed in Iran. And if anything, Iran is now more cohesive, stronger, with more support inside its country for retaining its sovereignty and independence than ever before. And of course, militarily, Iran is infinitely more capable today than it was just in June when the 12-day conflict occurred. So I suppose the next step is to turn to Venezuela. And see if you can do to Venezuela what you failed to do to Russia and failed to do to Iran. I mean, I don't see how else to explain it because under normal circumstances, none of these things would happen.
Right. Well, another thing I want to ask you about, Donald Trump has said that, according to him, he will send and give the Ukrainian military force Tomahawks. Yeah. Okay. We know the Tomahawks. They're 40 years old in design, but they've been modernized over the years, and they have capabilities of reaching long range with delivering, I think, a conventional payload on a Tomahawk would be like 300-400 pounds. No,
actually, it's 3,300 pounds.
Well, okay,
so it's a very large warhead, and
it's nuclear capable.
Yes, it is nuclear capable. Although we've never put a nuclear warhead on a Tomahawk and used it. And you're right, it is old now. It has a range of about 1,000 miles, maybe a few more. which means that if you fire it from anywhere inside Ukraine, you could hit most targets inside European Russia. So that's effectively a red line for the Russians. They're not anxious to stand by and watch the Tomahawks launched at population centers. And the great fear in Russia is that that's what they'll do, because that's where the Ukrainians have tended to focus on killing Russians as opposed to hitting specific infrastructure targets. Now, they've done both, but the fear is that they'll use it against the population. Now, the good news is, for the Russians at any rate, they have integrated air defenses, and they're not perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect air and missile defense. But they would probably shoot down most of these Tomahawks. Now, how could that be? Well, we're saying right now that we may have 20 to 50 available that we could send to the Ukrainians. Why so few? Most of the Tomahawks are designed to be fired from aircraft, and that means bombers. Ukrainians don't have any of those. The others are designed to be fired by submarines or ships at sea. Ukrainians really don't have a navy, so that's not going to happen. That means that you're forced into the ground-launched variant. There is a variant that was built for the United States Army, and the missiles are fired from trucks usually. It, however, is in very, very small numbers. The warhead is different from the warheads on the others. It's still a large warhead, but it's specially designed to be fired from this ground platform. In other words, there aren't very many of these, if they're available at all. And I don't even know that the ground-launched variant could carry a nuclear warhead. I suppose you could make modifications to do that. All of that aside, the Russians are viewing this as an unambiguous act of war, not necessarily by Ukraine, but by the United States. And the reason for that is that all mission planning and execution have to be accomplished by U.S. citizens, whether they are in uniform from the United States Army or they are contractors working for Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, any number of the defense corporations. So President Putin is trying to convey the understanding that they're not going to wait to figure out whether or not we're launching these missiles with nuclear warheads. They're not going to pretend that the Ukrainians are doing this. They're going to blame us, which means we could end up at war with Russia over this. This could be the so-called straw that breaks the camel's back, if you will.
That is very interesting. At the same time as Donald Trump takes the credit with maybe due diligence for getting an end or a ceasefire in Gaza. Another question arises. We took it up in a program in Swedish language today that's got many views. Who's going to finance the rebuild that they're talking about right now in Gaza? I mean, the place is in rubbles. And in my opinion, it might be the wrong one, Israel should pay for it. But the discussion is right now in the European Union's leadership, which is warmongering idiots, all of them, headed by Ursula von der Leyen, a lying bitch. European taxpayers are going to pay for the rebuild of Gaza. Why?
Well, whoever pays for the reconstruction of Gaza, and that's a distant possibility at this point.
Yeah, it would.
We have to be realistic.
There's not a lasting peace. You shouldn't imagine more.
But it looks like Mr. Kushner, who is the son-in-law of the president, and his affiliates, Mr. Witkoff and others, will all have their hands in the pot of money.
Yeah.
In other words, that some of this money will be transferred to them, and they will have a great deal to do with the rebuilding exercise. It's a sad commentary on the United States government, but we've reached a point now under this administration with President Trump that everything is transactional. And in fact, President Trump has made that very clear to everybody that cares to listen. If you're going to visit Mar-a-Lago or the White House and you're trying to accomplish something, then you should have a bag of money that includes millions, if not tens of millions, maybe even billions. And then you're going to be listened to carefully. Your wish is going to be considered and probably fulfilled. And they're all very proud of this. I mean, this is sort of back to this silly notion that we will sell equipment and munitions and weapons and missiles and rockets to the Europeans, who are then free to give these to the Ukrainians. In other words, the Europeans are going to pay for this. They're going to give it all to the Ukrainians. We're not going to participate anymore. At least that was the impression that was given. But we'll go ahead and sell you whatever you want. This was also, in my judgment, an abdication of responsibility on the part of the president to his role as the leader of NATO. If he's serious about the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and I don't think he is, then you would think that he would want a hand in finding a way to end this conflict. Well, that doesn't seem to be the case, because he held this meeting in Anchorage. And what people in Sweden need to understand is that this was vintage Trump, just like the trip to Israel, just like the briefing with the 800 generals. This was another media event. They put the red carpet out there. They lined the runway with America's advanced aircraft. We had a flyover of B-2 bomber with supporting jet fighters. And there was this big sort of, hello, how do you do? Welcome to, my empire, Mr. Putin. And they trooped off to have a meeting. Well, the Russians showed up, and the Russians have already provided us with proposals regarding how they want to end the war. And they expected that President Trump and his team would show up and say, well, we've looked at the 10 key points that you mentioned, and we're comfortable with the first 5 or 6, but we have questions about the 3 or 4, and wonder whether or not there was any flexibility on your part to examine these other 3 or 4 conditions. That didn't happen. No one had studied the Russian position at all. And so the Russians sat there and they made their presentation, saying exactly what they have been saying for almost 3 years, with some modification, but not much. And then they expected a response. And they got nothing.
Yeah.
President Trump seemed to think that he was going to overwhelm the Russians with his sort of charming personality, his glamorous military display, his meeting with them, and they would somehow or another say, well, let's have a ceasefire. It didn't happen. It didn't happen. So,
plus, I would like to talk about, the European Union, which is run by warmongering Ursula von der Leyen, and she has a foreign minister, whatever, Kaja Kallas, who's repeatedly, reiterated that we got to crush Russia. We have to fight Russia. With what?
Well, your country has a long history in the Baltic littoral.
Exactly.
So you're familiar with the people that live there. And there was always a very strong German aristocracy. But when it was under Sweden, under the Kingdom of Sweden, they were loyal to the King of Sweden, the Crown of Sweden. And when they were turned over to the Russian Tsar, the Russian Tsar Peter, who is known as Peter the Great, met with them. I think this came after the Treaty of Narva. I've got to go back and re-examine all that history.
You're pretty correct on that history. Sweden ruled over large parts of Russia, but suffered a defeat in 1709 at Poltava, for example.
Yeah, but the point is that Peter was not a fool. He met with the aristocrats who were effectively Germans, and he said, the first thing I want you to know is that I'm not going to change a thing. He said, this is a very successful economy, successful government, but I'm going to include you in my table of ranks. And so that's how you ended up with all these Russian generals who have German names and backgrounds during World War One. That's how you ended up with von Mannerheim, who was a general in the Imperial Russian Army, who then becomes the leader of Finland.
Yeah.
My point is that the problems that the people of Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia and Finland have with the Russians are problems with communism.
Exactly.
Because it was under the Soviets that they were badly handled and mistreated and harmed. We all know that. They don't seem to understand that this country is not the Soviet Union. And Putin is not Stalin, nor does he aspire to become Stalin. And he certainly doesn't want to rule the Baltic littoral. For the same reason, he has not crossed the Dnieper River and marched to the Polish border, because he doesn't want to make himself and his country responsible for millions of Western Ukrainians that hate Russians. We don't have to, this doesn't require in-depth analysis.
No.
The man is practical. The Russians are practical. They want to get this over with, and they want to get back to business as usual. And they are being attacked day and night by people in the Baltic littoral, in Poland, in the West, Germany, France, Great Britain, and I guess in Sweden, as something they are not. These are not Bolsheviks. These are not Soviet communists. These people are just Russians. If anything, they have more in common with the Tsarist world than they do with the Soviet world. And even that Tsarist world, they recognize, was a losing proposition, because territorial imperialism doesn't work. Eventually, you end up like the British in India or the French in Algeria or somewhere else, pouring more money into the place that you are trying to control than you're pulling out. So the answer is stop that and do business on a mutually beneficial basis. We don't seem to want to.
Let's just finish this conversation with the business side of it. As I know, you are very well versed in I mean, they blew up the Nord Stream gas pipeline south of Sweden in Danish territory. What are the Russians doing? They're building a pipeline to China instead. So what was the purpose of blowing that shit up as the CIA was behind?
When I was in the last 60, 70 days of the Trump administration in the Pentagon, I encountered large groups of people that said, oh, we have to stop this Nord Stream pipeline. It's terrible. And I would say, why? Well, that makes them dependent on Russia for cheap energy. And I said, doesn't that also mean that Russia is dependent on finished products, particularly technology, engines, machinery, and so forth from Germany? Well, no. Russia can turn that off, and then everyone is ruined. And then in the background, somebody says, well, if we turn it off, then they'll have to buy our oil, our liquefied natural gas. And everybody knew that that was a dead end because it's too expensive. Doesn't make any sense. Why would you do such a thing? So I actually argued against doing anything about it and saying this is not a threat to Europe. This is not a threat to anybody. But Washington is a place where people are inventing threats with each passing day everywhere in the world to justify the maintenance of this imperial overstretch that is designed to maintain American military hegemony over the planet. Why do you think arrangements have been made in Finland for all these bases and access for the U.S. military? What do you need an American military organization in Finland for? If the Soviets, the evil ones from the old evil empire, did not invade and attack, what makes you think that the current state, which is capitalist, and certainly a vast improvement over what existed under communism, is going to attack? It doesn't make any sense. These are inventions. I had thought at the time that the Germans and the Swedes and the Danes and the Finns were, on the whole, better educated than most Americans and had a better
You
grasp
were
of
wrong.
reality.
You were
Yeah,
wrong.
so I really never imagined that the Germans in particular would commit digital suicide.
Yeah. Well, Germany is going to be facing a crisis energy-wise. We're seeing Rheinmetall is expanding, which is a major producer of war materials, ammunition, and other things. But they cannot profitably produce automobiles anymore, which they were a superpower as a BMW, Mercedes, and all that. That's gone.
Well, the great genius of both the Germans and the Japanese after the Second World War was that they said, we'll let these Americans spend themselves into oblivion on military power.
Yeah.
We, on the other hand, will not do that. Instead, we will build up our scientific industrial base. We will increase our prosperity. That's the best thing that we can do for the security of our people. That has worked very well.
Yeah.
Now, the Japanese are not fools. They're buying Russian oil and gas. They've simply told us, thank you very much, but this is Japan. We have interests, and we are not going to shoot ourselves in the foot, and we are going to do business with Russia. Well, the Germans weren't that smart, because you have a whole new generation of Germans that have been systematically brainwashed into what you referred to at the beginning of this conversation, the world of what is it, Carl Schwab?
The World Economic Forum.
Yeah, this World Economic Forum, all this nonsense about the world, they've swallowed it hook, line, and sinker. I mean, the Japanese were pushed by us, oh, you should bring in immigrants. And the Japanese said, why? We don't need any. And ultimately they said, no, thank you very much. We're not interested in importing, large numbers of Muslims or Africans or anybody else from anywhere else in the world. The only people that can immigrate into Japan in small numbers are Koreans, because the Koreans can seamlessly assimilate into Japanese society. Very few people.
They have a lingual scale.
Oh well, it's Japanese is to Korean what German is to English.
Approximately,
English
yes.
Lived on an island, and over time they developed this new language called English, which is a halfway house between what the Germans speak and what you speak. Anyway,
I was in Germany this summer, for example, and if I speak Swedish to a hotel personnel, for example, I speak Swedish, they understand me. They speak back in German, I understand them. It's not that different.
Well, I don't know. I think you must have been in northern Germany, because if you go to Bavaria or Austria, nobody will understand anything you say.
I do speak German as well, so.
Yeah, but I've had this experience, and I had to spend a week in Stockholm before I could figure out what was being said, and even then it was only 50%. But the point I'm trying to make is that the Germans should have followed the Japanese model.
Yeah.
But they have inhaled, if you will, this poisonous gas from the World Economic Forum and globalism. And their entire country is on the verge of collapse as a consequence.
Exactly.
I don't think the Germans are finished. I disagree with that. I think
if you look at what Merz is doing, he's on the way out, exactly like Keir Starmer in England. Macron in France it's a total disaster, all of it.
But you know what he's
fed up with it.
Yeah, but you know what Merz has done that's been very helpful? He's actually talking about banning the Alternative für Deutschland, the AfD. Well, that's the best thing you could do for the AfD. The more people try to suppress the AfD, the more they attack it, the more they criticize it, the stronger it grows.
Exactly.
One of these things, Nietzsche said, was uns nicht umbringt, macht uns stärker. What doesn't kill us makes us stronger. Well, that's worked for the AfD. But these are stupid. They're not smart. And they're not alone. And Macron isn't much better, and Starmer is probably worse. I think it's all going to change, but probably not as fast as we would like. And the challenge at this point is to get rid of these deranged people who are currently in government and replace them with knowledgeable, balanced human beings and avoid a stupid, self-defeating, unnecessary conflict with Russia.
Yeah. That'll be our last comment for today. And I'll end it with by quoting Tom Hanks as Forrest Gump. Stupid is what stupid does.
Yeah. Can I say one thing before you sign off?
Of course.
Because I think the Swedes need to know this. The big period of economic expansion of the United States, in other words, where we went from being a middle grade power in terms of science, industry, technology, and agriculture, to a major power, occurred between 1870 and 1970. We really haven't grown very much since 1970. But here's what very few people realize. The heart of that expansion, when we really took off, occurred between 1920 and 1965. Mm-hmm. That's when we really grew. And during that period of time, we had the least immigration in our history. In fact, for most of that period, there was no immigration. But we did have a law on the books, which the Swedes should consider in light of what's been going on. And that law was eventually repealed 20 years ago. Big mistake. And the law was called the Exceptional Skills Act. And what that meant was, if you are exceptional in terms of the talent, the understanding, the knowledge, experience that you bring, we will admit you. But unless you fall into this category, you can't get in. That was passed in 1924. Well, just imagine who managed to get into the United States under the provisions of that law. Albert Einstein. Mm-hmm. Now, that made a lot of sense. What we are doing, or what we have been doing, and this is where I do agree with Trump, immigration is killing us, just as immigration is killing you, because it is breeding division and discontent and social anarchy. And it is putting at risk the core population's existence, the core culture, the core way of life that includes laws and religion, and language, everything else that you can imagine. And the trick that the people in the World Economic Forum and in the globalist camp have played on us is to tell us that we should be ashamed of what we are, and we should be guilty for whatever it was they claim we did in the previous 1,000 years. And stupid is as stupid does. We've been very stupid. We believe that nonsense.
Well said. I came into the United States in 1982 on a visa to get a green card, which I got, that I had to prove my proficiency. Mm-hmm. As I'm a graduate of economic school, and I'm also a graduate of the Swedish Navy. When I showed those papers, I got my green card.
Well, I'm glad that they did it for you. I would warn everybody, though, that no one graduates from the United States Navy. You survive it.
Yeah, okay.
Okay,
thanks
well, listen, thanks very much,
Mr. McGregor. I know you have a busy schedule. Thanks for accommodating my schedule. So see you later. I hope it's going to not be another month before we do it, but I'll keep you posted. I'm going to Bulgaria, by the way, and visiting some of these people that are influential there. And Bulgaria is an interesting nation. Located on the Black Sea. So we'll see. My good friend, old friend, is living there, so I'm going there in November. So maybe we'll do a program from there. We'll see.
Well, that's very exciting. Yeah, well, look, have a great trip and give everybody my best. And in the meantime, God bless everybody in Sweden.
Thank you so much. All right.
Bye-bye.